was told that this audience really wants to hear the corporate, the business perspective. So we're here to provide that, and we're going to try to differentiate our panel from the others by really focusing on what business people think and have experienced and how they're living their lives. And I thought Glenn teed it up very nicely with the point about the Gini coefficient and the survey. So I'm trying to deliver what we promised in the program. And the first question on the program was, are corporate leaders seeing the effects of de-globalization in their businesses? But I realized before I do that, I haven't even introduced who the panelists are. And although it's in a program and you can read more, I just want to start from the end. Marie Folks, Chief Executive Officer of Excellist and a director of 3 companies. Glenn Steinberg in the middle. Oh, by the way, Marie Folks has her degree class of 01 from CBS. Glenn in the middle, class of 91, a global and America's supply chain leader and a principal at EY. And closest to me, Garrett Van Ryzen, a VP Distinguished Scientist in Supply Chain Optimization Technology at Amazon and former faculty member here at Columbia Business School. So everybody's got a strong CBS connection, except me. Sorry about that. So let me jump in with that first question. And I guess I'll start with Marie down at the end. Are corporate leaders seeing the effects of de-globalization in their businesses? And feel free to answer from the perspective of Excellist or the 3 companies of which you're a director.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Very illustrious panel, obviously, and Peter, thank you for moderating. So from that perspective, I do think that there is a shift towards a little bit of de-globalization, particularly around some of the supply chain issues we're seeing. And many companies are very focused on the resiliency of building what they need to deliver products to their customers. Because let's face it, we're all here to deliver for what our customers need and to continue to drive that top line growth as well as our bottom line growth to deliver shareholder value. So frankly, I think, if you think about globalization, right? Going back, many companies did globalization big time in the 90s. And it really is a process where the businesses and other organizations, you develop that international influence and you're operating on an international scale. In particular, a lot of companies went to lower cost model of looking at how they can reduce their cost so that they can absolutely deliver more profitability. And what we're seeing is a lot of companies who have done that are looking for opportunities to get back into what we would call reshoring, so that they can reduce the longevity of what they're seeing in their supply chain, what they're seeing particularly on the water with the delay in the containers, the increasing container cost. And they're seeing a lot of cost around tariffs as well. And in particular, that's been impactful to what they're doing in the US, especially if they're bringing product back. So I think a lot of companies are looking at how do you reshore, and they're looking at particularly here in the US, but in addition, they're looking at Mexico, other places, Vietnam, and so forth. The issue with coming back to the US has a multidimensional facet. One in particular that companies are struggling with is human resource capital. And when I say that, I mean, if you think about reshoring, if you're a manufacturing company, and I was in manufacturing with Johnson Controls with automotive, with Tenneco with automotive, but also with industrial gas and air products. And if you think about that in particular, we don't have enough skills trade to do a lot of the work that we need done in the US. And when you look at most of the jobs that are posted today, they're for skills trade paying $30, $40 an hour, and we're not finding that talent. And we used to really find that talent from Germany, Hungary, Poland, but with a lot of what's happening around immigration, we're seeing the impact there. So I do think companies are looking at their resiliency of their supply chain and seeing how that they can reshore, but they're going up against many factors that they need to solve for.
Okay, we can come back to that. Although I want to ask you now, are there any particular examples you can give me of the challenge, the tough decisions that are being made, say some companies of which you're a director?
Yes. So in particular, there are a couple of companies that we're looking at building more manufacturing, for example, here in the US, but that comes with regulations on EPA and all the building permits, which is quite challenging. And there are other areas we're looking at building manufacturing in Mexico, for example. So there are specific examples that companies I'm involved with are looking at today.
All right, so Glenn, I understand you just came back from a conference in Barcelona where supply chain was the topic of the day, and you're an expert on it. What are you seeing specifically? Is deglobalization really happening, and how is it affecting businesses?
Yeah, I would like to say, and thank you for having me, and honored to be here. The great supply chain reset is underway. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the disruptions have been well documented and broadly discussed, and the truth is they started before the pandemic with things like Brexit and America's tax reform, which had ripple effects around the world. And these disruptions are continuing, and that's because there's something much broader at play here, right? I believe the economic order of the planet is changing, okay? So since the fall of the Soviet Union, the last 30 years, we've been operating in what we call a unipolar economic order, with basically the US leading the way, a relatively stable world order, and all of our supply chains were designed in that economic order. So we went all the way to China to save a nickel because we could. We had geographic concentration, vendor concentration to save some money because we could. Mm-hmm. We're now, with the rise of China, we're now moving into a bipolar economic order, and some predict a multipolar world with perhaps India by 2050. And in that kind of order, it is inherently less stable, right? And you're seeing economic nationalism today, right? So with countries, you see what's going on in Taiwan and other places. So companies realize they need to build resiliency into their supply chains. So as a result, they're looking at should I decouple from China?
Yeah.
Should I fully decouple from China, partially decouple from China? Where should I go? Should I move back to the US? Well, that's expensive, as Marie said. Should I reshore into Europe?
But part of your job is to help people answer that question. So what kind of advice are you giving them?
Yeah, there's several different scenarios playing out. There's a China for China strategy being played out. So you design your supply chain in China to serve only China, and then a supply chain for the rest of the world. And that gets at the sustainability issue. Perhaps people in some Western countries don't want to have products where they don't have visibility into how they're manufactured. There's a China plus one strategy. So the cost is fantastic. We got to keep going with China. We can't give that up. But let's have a plus one. Let's have another source, in case of, Cold War II, or God forbid some sort of a conflict. So the China plus one strategy. The U.S. Is looking to, get people to reshore critical sectors. I know I'm overgeneralizing, but Europe, in general, is trying to get folks to manage the risk versus actually reshoring. Mm-hmm. ASEAN is really surfacing as a potential, potential replacement of China, if possible, right? To become a manufacturing hub, but that's going to take years for that to happen. We are seeing some people move their headquarters from Hong Kong to Singapore. Vietnam, in particular, is being very aggressive in trying to attract folks. But I've had the honor of talking to lawmakers here in the U.S. Several times over the last few years. And while they want to incent everyone to bring back certain sectors and all manufacturing, it's just not feasible. The American consumer demands low cost, and if we're honest with ourselves, we're not going to win on cost here in the US. So there was a discussion of perhaps we could encourage companies to bring their manufacturing to Central America. In that way, you can still get at the low cost, and perhaps you could stem the tide of illegal immigration at the same time. So, not easily done. We have to stand up those governments, but help them become more stable, build roads and bridges and trains and ports, which is a very expensive proposition.
But on the whole, I realize every company is different, but do you find yourself when you go in to talk to companies telling them to do more to reshore or nearshore, or hold your horses, you're trying to do this too quickly? Or what's the general trend?
It depends on the industry.
Okay.
Not to give a consulting answer, but it depends. What we are mostly, where we are landing with clients is have a +1 strategy. Okay, you've got to have some resiliency built into your supply chain. You can't have geographic concentration, and you can't have vendor concentration.
And that +1 could be in the United States, or it could be anywhere else in the world.
Could be in the United States. Again, depends on the sector. Like, for example, Guatemala, we talked about Central America. Very young workforce, a lot of workers, a large workforce, low cost, so maybe the garment industry could go there. They don't have a lot of, STEM rates are very low, science, technology, math in Guatemala, so you look for certain industries to go there. Costa Rica, just the opposite, small workforce, but very high STEM rates, a little more expensive, so maybe more high-tech sectors would go there.
Sure, interesting. Okay, so now we'll move on to Garrett. As a very specific company perspective, Amazon, a huge expert in supply chain. The company's an expert, and you're an expert among experts. So you have a lot to say. Tell us about just generally how is Amazon? Is it seeing effects of deglobalization, and if so, what are they?
Yeah. So first, one big caveat. I was at Columbia as a faculty member for 25 years, and I've only been in the industry for like 8 years, so I'm kind of like a professor in sheep's clothing. So but I have, I've been at Amazon now for a stretch. I manage supply chain group, but the Amazon supply chain is a very different beast than what these guys have been talking about, because it's like, we're a consumer-oriented supply chain. Anybody who knows anything about Amazon, it's like, we have this working backwards from the customer philosophy. Like our role is to link producers to consumers, and to make it convenient for you in your living room, sitting on your app, to get pretty much anything available in the world and get it, the next day. And so it's sort of like what these guys have been talking about is, sort of the, producer, where do they produce things, how do they get things to the point of being able to sell them to the customer. We're kind of in the business of like doing.
You're not owning those goods.
Yeah. So from our perspective, the way we look at it is like, we're there to serve customers, and we're there to give them as much selection as possible. Like the way we generally think of it is, it's like our value proposition is around like selection, like Jeff Bezos' idea of the everything store, everything in the world at your fingertips kind of idea. So super large selection. We have like millions of products you can buy on Amazon, and then getting those products super efficiently to you, and also like speed of delivery. So, we made a big effort back in 2019 to kind of move from like 2-day delivery to 1-day delivery. Now we're doing a lot of stuff that's within the same day. You order it in the morning, you get it in the evening, and then now even like same day where you get it within 4 or 6 hours. And so and then low prices. And
people in the audience can't believe this, by the way. I'm seeing the reaction out there. 4 to 6 hours, that's crazy.
Yeah, and that stuff all has to be local. So like one of the things that we definitely see from a supply chain standpoint is like, as consumers are getting used to getting things quickly at their fingertips, faster and faster, you can't do that if stuff is spread all over the continent.
Yeah.
So you have to go to much more sort of like localized, at least from our standpoint, like localized staging of inventory. So, we made a huge expansion in our fulfillment center network during the pandemic. You know, those facilities basically have to be within a couple hundred miles of you to get something to you like in a day or less than a day. So that has changed, like the footprint of like kind of how we operate and some of the strategies we're pursuing to kind of localize availability of products.
But let me ask you though, like, say a product comes from China.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not going to come from China in 4 to 6 hours.
No, right. So like, no.
Probably.
No. It
Okay.
will definitely not come in.
All right.
So the other side of it, and the other thing to realize about Amazon is like, at this point, you know, we run a third-party marketplace for seller. So Amazon, you know, traditionally Amazon was a bookstore, and branched into media, blah, 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 and things like that. Up until about 10 years ago, like everything that was sold on Amazon was Amazon functioning as a retailer. We would go out to suppliers, we would source things, bring it in, blah, blah, blah. You know, a little over 10 years ago, we started this FBA business, or this third-party marketplace business, where sellers can come onto our platform and they can sell products. That business has ramped up to the point where it's like more than half of our volume at this point in Amazon. Now, those individual brand owners and sellers, like they have their own supply chain problem to deal with. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those sellers are based in China. There are a lot of China-based sellers. And so we've seen definitely a big growth in that population. First of all, that business has grown a lot. And then within that business, a big chunk of that are like China-based producers. And so we've seen a big influx in kind of like, you know, our business, suppliers sending things from Asia and China in particular. What we've done to address that, but again, like kind of our function is connection. So what we've done to address that is actually try to make it easier to do business in China as a seller on Amazon. So we have something, we have the global shipping program where we provide bulk capacity for ocean freight. We can arrange for ocean freight to you know, at very competitive rates and kind of lock that in for sellers. We're starting to expand something called Amazon warehousing and distribution, where that when they bring it in from overseas, they can store it at a low-cost domestic facility for injection into our network. And so if anything, like we are trying to make that process even more efficient for those guys.
So
I
Peter,
presume that the components that people are buying from the FBA is not missile components.
Yes, that's a correct assumption. Yeah.
Okay, so national security is not a big issue.
Yeah, it's consumer goods.
Okay.
Consumer goods. And,
So
Yeah,
Peter,
Marie,
I was just
yes.
going to say, to build onto what Garrett said, is I think despite the ongoing tensions, I think the numbers are really what speak for themselves. So the ongoing tension between China and the U.S. in 2022, you know, our global trade is $25 trillion. I mean, it's huge, $25.3 trillion. So the numbers are significant, and even for China and the U.S. alone, it's nearly 700 billion. So even with our top trade partners like Mexico, Canada, Japan, China is where a lot of the discussion is happening. And so to answer the question even more fully, what a lot of companies are doing, and I think a lot of recommendations that they're getting are, one, build inventory close by, right? And to Garrett's point, it's you can have a warehouse where you can have it on consignment, so that helps reduce the cost. In addition, you see a proliferation now of a lot of supply chain companies coming into the market to help those really large global suppliers or companies as well. So that's another thing. Thirdly, I know a very large membership warehouse company that actually went into buying and owning their own shipping containers because they were at the mercy of the increase in the shipping container costs going up threefold, and that was really impacting a lot of their costs. So we're seeing that happen. And so you're seeing companies doing a lot of things to help protect their bottom line, but also protect the product that the customers really want on this side of the aisle.
Yeah, I would add to that the trade with China is still very significant. And just as all these other countries are offering incentives to move manufacturing, I mentioned Vietnam's being aggressive, for example, China isn't sitting still. So they're setting up Hainan Island by 2025, will be the entire island will be a duty-free zone. So trying to attract more and more business to stay in China.
So I have a lot more questions, but I also want to get the audience involved because of a very knowledgeable audience. And please, let's start over here. Who has the mic for the audience?
I wondered if somebody could comment on the services industry. So we talked a lot about physical goods.
Yes.
But what are you seeing in things like intellectual capital that's been used offshore, like analytic work or legal work? Are you seeing shifts in that back to the U.S., or are you seeing that staying abroad?
You know, it's an interesting question, and I think it's a really good one. I do think there are hidden risks associated with deglobalization, one being technology, the other being the intellectual capital that you just talked about. But I also think finance and shared services is a big one, particularly when you look at how big India is in that space. And I think India and the US, we haven't had that issue, is the tension with China. But I also think the competitive edge of those companies and what that signifies, particularly the technology, the IP, the shared services, it's important that we understand what that does if we're reshoring the talent we need in the US to really be able to come up to speed would be tremendous. And remember, we haven't talked much about this, but immigration is a big issue that's come up that's really preventing us from really having to bring all that back reshoring. Because remember, H-1B visas have been really highly reduced, and so you're having a lot of talent that's no longer in the US to bring that work back too. So we have so many jobs opening, right? But we don't have a lot of people to apply for those jobs. So definitely risk associated with deglobalization in those particular areas. And in particular, the legal side as well, I think that is something that we really have to think through, because that's very local. It's local for every country, every region, all the laws that are associated with making the product, the engineering of the product. So that's something we really haven't accounted for in this global deglobalization effort that you're seeing talked about. But again, it's a lot of talk because the numbers still prove that we still are a global economy. Although you're seeing the tension and the tariffs. Now, in one of the boards I sat on, the tariffs were significant to the bottom line, that we had to go and think about pricing and a lot of issues that could have impacted our overall top line. But we managed through it, and those are issues that I think are not being discussed as much. I'll turn over to the other panel members.
Any thoughts on that, or
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, like, on the Amazon side, I don't know. I think retail is classified as a service, but Glenn can answer that question. But it's like, we are, like I said, we're consumer facing. Like, so Amazon now at this point, like, we do business in 20 plus countries in the world. We have a big European operation. We're in the UK, Japan, Middle East, Mexico, Brazil. So we, from our standpoint, is like, we're a growth-oriented company. There's only so many consumers in North America, and at some point, like, we have to push into the rest of the world. So we have a part of our operation that's very much focused on, like, serving customers across the globe, and it's like in various stages, depending on which countries you look at. And the other side of it is that, like, and I'm not an expert at this, but like, our tech organization, in terms of like where we get talent in the company to develop technology, is relatively global, because like we have tech teams in Europe, we have some tech teams in China and some in India, like software engineers, scientists, people like that. So, it's like, often for us, technical talent is the bottleneck for expanding, and their technical talent is all over the world, and it's relatively easy to work with people across the globe, in technical projects. So, so both on the consumer side and kind of on our own internal kind of tech talent side, we are a pretty global company in that sense, and that's just been increasing over time.
I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to come back to the audience. And this is something I talked about with Glenn about just before the meeting, was this idea that companies seem to be forced to take sides, or they prefer not to take sides. And Glenn told me about this distinction between an anywhere company and a somewhere company. A lot of multinationals would prefer to be seen as anywhere companies that sort of live happily in every country where they do business, but with the rise of deglobalization and nationalism, governments are pushing companies to like say, are you with us or against us? Question is, have the three of you seen that? And I'll just come right down the line, starting with Marie.
Well, we're seeing it playing out in the media, right? And we see companies who get impacted by that. But I think the company has to think overall of their brand. The brand and the imaging that companies work so hard and invested in is really important to the overall mission of the company and the enterprise value of the company. So I think if you think about like an Apple or others, how global those companies are, it's really hard to extricate themselves and say, we are a US company or a China company. It is, as Glenn said, it's an anywhere company because the brand is loved in all places and customers, for example, are in all places. So I think companies really have to think about the regulatory and operating environment of each country and not to have the political landscape really pigeonhole them into taking sides.
Well, that's what they'd prefer, obviously, but
Right.
China's a great example. Apple being pressed on, I don't know the details, but use of forced labor or something like that.
Right.
What do they do in a situation like that?
You know, I think they have to tread lightly because you have to think about all of the product and intellectual development happens here in California for Apple, for example. But a lot of the building of the actual product is made in China. And you have to think about that and say, okay, if we can't get the product everywhere, that's going to impact the company significantly. Another example would be if you think about the semiconductor industry. Now, I was in the industrial gas business for over 5 years. And all the semiconductor companies were a customer of mine. And one customer in particular, it was significant because we had talked a lot about how to build an additional fab, a gigafab here in the US. But that investment is over $10 billion, just one fab, that big clean room. And that customer was a little bit reluctant to do that. And so when you're in the industrial gas company, you start to see a lot of the growth that's happening and you're the input into the fab industry. So we were doing a lot of business, for example, with TSMC. Mm-hmm. And so we were telling customers here, there's a lot of push around IoT and a lot of push around the chips that's coming. This was 5 years ago, pre the pandemic. None of us knew the pandemic was going to happen. And this particular customer was really reluctant to put in a fab. Now they're putting in a fab, but it's late. Yeah. So you think about how do you choose what to do by which country you're in, and how do you protect your brand, and how do you protect your growth, in particular if the political government is asking you to take sides. I would say caution companies to really tread lightly because you're a global customer, global brand, global company, and everyone wants to feel good about owning and buying, for example, an Apple product. As an example, I've been an investor in Apple for 20-something years. I didn't invest enough, but because I'm still here working, but 20-something years. And it's gone up and it's gone down, but for me, the love of Apple is, and as an investor, is that's the only product I'll buy, for example. I wouldn't go buy another competing product. But that's my, I would say, nationalism. But again, it's a global company, and so I think those companies really have to protect their brands and tread lightly.
I think part of this discussion is whether we are headed towards Cold War II or not. And are we going to move back to full globalization, but only onshore the critical industries and critical sectors? Are we going to go into Cold War II where there are two distinct blocks, and yes, you will have to pick a block, There are some countries that could float between or try to. I know
Companies.
companies,
Yeah.
countries, companies, all
Okay.
of that. I know there's a push to figure out what's going to happen with Africa, for example.
Okay,
All
yeah.
the
Yeah.
rich things they have there. Which block would they go to?
Sure.
Or are we going to move into this, what I call the regionalization of globalization, where there are several blocks and you become self-reliant within your block? So it's somewhat global, but it's decoupling the full global. And the companies are going to have to choose.
So what kind of advice can you give to companies that are trying to sort that out?
Yeah, it's all about building resiliency. And resiliency really, it's a simple definition, equals visibility plus agility. Okay, visibility is key to resiliency. You have to have visibility into your full supply chain, right? Not only your suppliers, but your suppliers' suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers, what we call tier N supply base. It starts with visibility, but if you don't have agility built into your supply chain to do something about it, it doesn't matter. So you need.
So that all sounds good and very sensible, but there is a cost to it, right?
Yeah.
And companies are worried about their P&L quarter by quarter.
That's right.
How do they make those tough decisions about how much money, tell shareholders, well, we're going to take a big hit because we're investing in something that we may never need?
Right.
But let's look at why countries trade, right? Countries trade because of the comparative cost of doing a product or service, and they look for the absolute lowest cost.
Right.
And so that helps us overall because the lowest cost is what we've gone after. And so to go back to a high cost, we all are going to
That's
pay
right.
for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this can't be a race to the bottom. We're not going to win. The U.S. is in a competition. There are winners and there are losers, right? And if we want to compete, we're at risk of losing our technological edge and our economic edge right now, right? If we want to compete on cost, we're going to lose. So we need to compete on the higher level sectors, the higher level industries, and go win there. And I guess begs the question, do we need a strategic industry policy here in the U.S., okay, which perhaps could be counter to complete open free trade, right? But should the R&D credits be the same for gaming apps as it is for quantum science? Maybe not. So I think there needs to be a change in our economic policy as a country as well.
Did you want to add on that, Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're pretty agnostic about these kind of things because again, we're we go where our customers go and the people that sell on our platform. So we're more or less responding to their decisions rather than having a point of view of do we want them to be in China or here or whatever. It's
Can I just ask Glenn, I know that you're going to be moderating the next panel, but you have the book Walls and Bridges, and this is so relevant, this conversation we're having right now. Do you have anything to say just from the perspective of corporations on this that you can add to the conversation? And if you could stand up so everybody can hear you.
I mean, really just what you mentioned before. You mentioned any...
Oh, here's a mic. Here's a mic.
Anywheres and somewheres. There, I stole that from Chris DeBooth, who's a wonderful...
AEI, right?
At AEI, well, now at Hudson, but was at AEI.
Yeah.
I think the issue, trying to figure out that gap between being an anywhere and a somewhere. No business really wants to be a somewhere, but domestic political forces do it. And the point I tried to make in the book is that if you leave it to the political realm, politics only understands two things: building walls and building bridges. Building walls is easy to sell to the public. Building bridges, helping people adjust is hard. So it's really interesting to hear these perspectives.
All right, who else has a question?
There's one right here.
It's Abby Joseph Cohen. Is that who that is? Yeah, here's a good mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. Abby Cohen, retired partner at Goldman Sachs, but a very proud professor of business here at Columbia now. I first want to just provide one important fact, if I may, which follows up to an important observation that Marie made about how critical immigration is to the United States. You know, our nation has been built on immigration,
Yes.
and more than half of the increase in our workforce prior to the pandemic were immigrants. Think about that, more than half. And relevant to this conversation, 65% of the working PhDs in the United States in engineering and science are immigrants. This is really a critical factor. And by the way, about half of the Nobel Prize winners in the United States are immigrants. So when we talk about immigration from a political standpoint, people are often thinking about the lower end of the income spectrum, which is also critically important because we have such an incredible need in our service industries, but we are really hurting our future in terms of not allowing these really high quality people in, and they've been restricted as well. The only good news is that those visa applications have just now begun to increase. So good news there. But I'd like to ask a question primarily of Garrett, but really of everyone up on the stage. And that has to do with what responsibilities are there for companies like Amazon and others in terms of bringing in lots of product which may or may not fit into the regulatory standards here, including things like consumer product safety. Is there an obligation that you have to make sure that the stuff that's coming in is safe to use? There was a great question or comment, I think it came from Glenn earlier, about, well, we don't allow importation of defense products and so on. Well, what about the stuff we're all buying inexpensively from some of your companies?
No, it's a great point. And I mean, just a caveat, like I'm not on that. I'm not in the merchandise kind of side of the business. So we kind of, but Amazon has a ton of stuff we're in place with regard to fraud and safety of products. And it's a tricky thing when you're trying to run a third-party marketplace. It's a tricky thing to try to like essentially police all the people that are selling stuff on your platform. But that the company takes that very seriously, and there are big efforts across the company to do that. So, and they have to apply by all the usual, government regulations, safety standards, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I guess the other social responsibility thing is kind of for us, it's like, Amazon has the climate pledge, which I think most people are pretty aware of, which is kind of this goal of getting to net zero carbon by 2040 in our operations, which is a very tall task because all the stuff I was just describing of like bringing stuff across the ocean and like distributing it across the continent and like delivering it to your door. There's a lot of transportation that goes into that, a lot of, facilities, a lot of energy that gets consumed along the way. And, but that is something the company has taken very seriously. For us, that is a big component of our social responsibility, is to try to hit those goals. And so, we were talking before the panel about like, Amazon's a big enough scale company that we can do things at the level of like making investments in, clean tech companies to try to like build the technology we would need to transform our supply chain into something that's much more sustainable. So like the Rivian investment is a good example of that, and different sort of clean energy technologies. We'd like to be able to like do ocean freight with ships that use like e-fuel, for example, clean energy generated like methanol and things like that. So there's efforts to decarbonize our operations that are sort of our biggest push internally on kind of the social responsibility front.
Yeah, your question's akin to something that I've been working on, similar. So we've been working to help decarbonize the value chain of the largest consumer products company in the world. And the truth is they don't actually own their fleet. They outsource it to a 3PL. So the question is, does the consumer hold the consumer products company responsible to decarbonize their value chain, or the 3PL, right? And I think it's very clear that this company needs to own this, even though they don't own the trucks. So they're working with their third parties to help do it. It's a similar concept to what you're talking about, that Amazon doesn't actually manufacture the products it's selling on the platform, but are they responsible?
Yeah, Murray?
Yeah, I think it's really important, again, highlighting, thank you for bringing up the point about the immigration, because I think it's pretty critical. And I'll just add 2 points on that and try to give my own spin on the question you ask about the products that are coming in, that what's the responsibility of the companies? Because a lot of those products could be harmful, especially to kids, for example. So, but on the immigration issue, this is so critical. So I was CEO of a private equity company for over 2 years, over $2 billion company. And we provided design services and food service equipment to all the food service companies you can think of, restaurants, hospitals, Columbia, so we provide all of the, if you turn a restaurant upside down, we provided everything except the food. And in that service industry, when I took over, 3 weeks in, the pandemic hit, so I had to go into crisis mode to save the company. But we came out of it and we grew even in the pandemic, but our customers, 80% of our customers closed. And some of them couldn't reopen because they couldn't get workers to be in the background, cook, chefs, dishwashers, to serve. It was such a challenge. And many people don't really see, but a lot of restaurants have closed because of that. But even, personally, I know many people live in New York City, but I can't get anyone to mow my lawn anymore. It's just, it really permeates. But here's
What's a lawn?
A lawn, yeah. But here's an impactful one. When I ran all of the Americas for Air Products, it was a $4 billion division. We produce and sell hydrogen, oxygen, argon, and helium. When the pandemic hit, trying to get oxygen to the hospitals, we had 1,200 tractor trailers and 900 drivers. We couldn't get drivers to get oxygen to the hospital to save lives.
Wow.
That's how impactful, when we think about immigration, we don't always see it, but it does impact us significantly in this country. And we don't have enough workers here to do the jobs that are out there today. And that impacts GDP. And then one more factor. Travel is about 10% of global GDP. With deglobalization, travel is being impacted. Travel is being impacted significantly. And that's a big number for the economy as well, because people would be afraid to go to different countries. You don't have a lot of people coming and immigrating for jobs and so forth. But to your point about some of the products that are coming in, it's something that I think we have to pay special attention to. Particularly, we just had a story on the news about the IKEA dressers that were imported and fell and killed so many kids. And so I think as the Consumer Protection Agency, they don't have enough manpower to even get at this. So I think there is a moral aspect that companies really think about to be able to help impact this as well. But again, how does that play with their mission of delivering shareholder value? I think there's a dichotomy, and how do you blend it together is an interesting discussion we should all have.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I was also going to say on the immigration front, in the tech world, I mean, companies like Amazon and Google and everything, they wouldn't be what they are without the ability to have immigrant talent in this country. I mean, most of my colleagues on the science and engineering side are immigrants, and they're the top talent from their countries, and they come to this country because this is where the opportunity is, and companies like Amazon are we just would not be functioning the way we are. I mean, even though I mentioned we go across the globe to try to get a talent, a huge chunk of our technical talent are people that come to this country to get advanced degrees and then end up at companies like that. And so I don't think we would have the sector that we have without that talent. And so it's like
So
absolutely
just,
critical.
I think that's a really important point, and just to elaborate, so the fear you will hear in Congress is, oh, these Chinese scientists are coming over, they're working in American companies, and they're taking all their know-how back to China, and it's a net loss for America. You
Yeah.
would disagree with that?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I don't know, it's like, yeah, no, that's not, there may be some isolated cases of that, but that's not been anywhere near the norm.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I know a lot of more people questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but can I see some questions here? Let's see. How about right here in the front? Well, I'll ask you both. You both get a chance to ask questions. How about that?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's working.
Yep. Thank you very much. My question is particularly about India and manufacturing. There's a lot of buzzword in DC. It's about China and India. And the Indian government and the United States government recently agreed on critical and emerging technologies and semiconductors and everything. How do you evaluate India's socioeconomic policy? And like, I know they're investing a lot of money on infrastructure, but their contract enforcement regime is very, very bad. And as EY, how do you evaluate, foreign direct investment, mergers, acquisitions in India?
All right, and by the way, guys, I know that you have a lot to say, but let's try to keep the answers short so we can
Okay.
get a couple more questions in, all right?
All right, real
Start
quick.
with
I
Glenn.
mean, as I said earlier, I think most of the people I speak with, companies, congressmen, congresswomen, they believe India will rise to the level of China and the U.S. by 2050 and truly be in a multipolar world. High STEM rates, very large population, highly educated. Policies will have to change, infrastructure has to get better, all these things. But high-tech industries, et cetera, manufacturing in India, we see that growing significantly.
Okay, so why don't we go to you?
Thank you. Simple question. I've heard a lot about what companies should be doing as a response to deglobalization. I'm more curious about right now, just for a few examples, what are companies actually doing?
That's a great question, yeah. Maybe we'll start with Glenn on that one, if I don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So, as I said, some companies are reshoring into the U.S., but it is the higher value industries, semiconductor, chip plants being built, EV battery factories. It's the higher end. They are not, companies are not reshoring everything. It is just too costly. And, I spoke to a recent company out on Long Island, one we would probably all know, some household products, and they said 70% of their revenue flows through one factory in China. And if they move that to the US, they're out of business in 6 months. They cannot compete on cost. So they are staying, and they are looking at that China plus one strategy. They're going to keep going until we get into, or if we get into a Cold War situation, and they're going to have a plus one strategy, another source that's ready but not fully baked.
Great. Anybody else, or I'll go to the audience? How about right here in the middle? Yes, you.
Hi there. Automation and AI technologies are also very much in the mix as we talk about all of these trends and cost savings and efficiencies and making for better supply chains. Can you speak to what you're seeing play out to date in supply chains with this technology and what you foresee for the future?
So for what I'm seeing, you're starting to see standardization of the processes. You're starting to see some, as you mentioned, reshoring, but you're starting to see, I would say, incorporating redundancies. Because I think people want to make sure if something happens and, ports are closed, they can have product in another location. I think people are using AI in particular to say, okay, how do we make sure we are adopting the best supply chain technologies? And a lot of supply chain technology companies are coming up, smaller ones that I think are more nimble and can really impact companies to improve their bottom line, because a lot of companies were doing it internally and their resources were stretched very, very thin when we had a lot of the issues on supply chain. Some of it's moderating. Some other things you're seeing, companies are increased pricing to make sure, but they're building that redundancy and they're having a secondary location just to make sure they don't get impacted. Now, for the future of AI, I am not an AI expert to say how that will impact the supply chain, but I hope that that will be helpful for us because it can hopefully give us a lot more information than a human brain can give us immediately, right? Everything that goes into AI is from the human brain, but I think the amalgamation of what AI can pull and give us immediately could be significantly impactful in this industry.
Yeah, so listen, people ask me, so where is this all headed? We've got all this amazing new technologies, we've got all this disruption going on, geopolitics, right? So our supply chains today are basically very linear, very long, very rigid, right? We are moving towards a networked ecosystem, okay? Where all the data is in the cloud and any event that happens in the supply chain comes down and everyone can work on the issues at the same time, simultaneously. But we're on a path.
Comes down. Can you explain what you mean by comes down?
So a networked ecosystem, all the companies in a supply chain.
Yeah.
The OEM, the supplier, the customer, right?
Yeah.
All these companies, the data could be up in the cloud and all shared.
Okay.
And when an event happens, disruption or increase in demand, they can all see it at the same time and work on it, change their manufacturing schedules, change their supply plans. Today, if there's a disruption or something happens in the supply chain, it flows linearly back through the supply chain. Could take months.
So AI helps with that process?
AI, where it's headed after this networked ecosystem is towards an autonomous supply chain. And this is where AI really can play a role, right? Because it's all about data in the end. All these supply chain decisions. Should I make more? Should I buy more? What production schedule should I be on? So we're already starting to see companies work towards this autonomous supply chain. And it's really starting in the planning space, the supply chain planning space.
So it would be like a chess game where the computer chess might make a move that a human being would never make a move, like some strange sourcing decision or something like that, or something going around the world in a different kind of way that might look more expensive, but in fact ends up being cheaper or something like that.
Optimizing.
Yeah, optimizing in a surprising way, right, that a human being might not do.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Well, not to brag, but I think we already have a
all right.
Yeah, it's like pretty much the way we run. So the way we run the Amazon business, it's like so. Like I'm the supply chain optimization technology group. We developed a technology that runs. So we make, forecasting decisions, buying decisions, placement decisions, like kind of like network design decisions, like capacity decisions. Every time you order on something on Amazon, we try to, where do we get it from? Like, can we put it in 1 box, 2 boxes? How do we route it to you? The scheduling of trucks, all of this happens through technology at Amazon. And pretty much like what happened with us is it's kind of like originally, and this predates me being there, but so we've been doing this for about 10, 15 years now, but it's like, it used to be that like we would develop this technology and then we'd have like, merchants and kind of supply chain business people running this business. But it's really, we have this notion of like hands off the wheel automation, but we're basically, it's gotten to the point now where like our technology pretty much runs the retail business. And so it's like we have these machines running the business and, people come and ask, well, why did the machine do this? Or why is the machine doing that? And it's like we're more in the mode of kind of like, responding to the business leaders to explain why the tech is doing what it's doing, and then trying to.
Sometimes you don't know why the tech is doing it.
Yeah, it's a complicated system, and we intervene to try to like improve it and stuff like that. And there's all sorts of, so we use all sorts of deep neural networks for forecasting, a lot of machine learning stuff. The whole LLM thing is like a big new, obviously a lot of people are super interested in that. It's not so immediate what like physical supply chain, because a lot of it's more like kind of nitty gritty, like stuff moving around, designing, transportation schedules, stuff like that. But certainly in the areas where like you interface with humans in the supply chain, so like, can a supplier, like maybe to Glenn's point, can a supplier figure out why, what's happening with their product in the network, like to be able to do like natural language queries and kind of like, we're looking at it for like customer service, like and seller support service. And so I think a lot of those tasks that have to do with interfacing with people are really open to massive amounts of automation with that technology.
All right. So I think we're down to 2 minutes. So one more question. How about right there in the middle?
Hi, Garrett. As an industrial engineer, I think about you need eyes in the manufacturing facilities, or you need individuals, you need bodies. I don't know how it can all be all AI. But secondly, that was just a commentary.
Yeah.
So it just
Yeah.
made me cringe.
I don't.
But are
I
you
was probably exaggerating a bit. I mean, it's like there are humans in the loop, and but it's yeah.
So my other question. Is Amazon going to consider returning or coming to New York after that last fiasco?
Oh, yeah, somebody asked me about that.
We were just talking.
That is definitely not my job, like, to worry about that. But I would just say, like I was telling the other panelists when we were talking before, it's like, yeah, it was unfortunate that we weren't able to build a second headquarters here. That being said, Amazon has a huge presence in New York, and it's growing. And they just view it as like New York's a great city for talent. I mean, that's what I mean. Like on the tech side, it's all about like access to talent and like where is the talent and where can you convince people to live and work for you, and where can you find people that aren't already working for you. So so New York is just organically becoming a pretty big hub. It's like for my group, it's the second largest hub for employees in our group outside of Seattle.
All right, so just about out of time. I think I'm going to just, there's really not enough time to squeeze another question in, so I'm going to thank the panelists, and please join me in thanking the panelists for a great session.